All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Tokenicer, and I'm here to bring you guys in-depth analysis, news, and insights from the digital asset space, along with covering the progressive tokenization of the world. And if you haven't already, remember to follow the Twitter and Instagram to connect with me and just stay up to date, and check out the Medium and Spotify for more content just like this. Now, in today's episode, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Vectorspace AI. For those of you guys who might be unfamiliar with what Vectorspace AI is and what they do, I'll leave a link up here to a breakdown I previously did of them. But pretty much, they're a crypto company in the space that's working to create smart correlation matrix data sets that basically detect hidden relations in any data you feed into them. So basically, you're augmenting just raw data into these data sets, where now you can put context into them. Like, say maybe you build a data set for how human particles would react and then plug in the context. So like, let's say in a nuclear environment. Well, now you got a data set that can detect how our human genes and particles would react to a nuclear environment and some of the hidden changes and relations that occur over time in our bodies. Though I'm sure probably nothing good happens in that scenario. But this, of course, can go into any industry with quantitative or qualitative data. So now let's use the finance industry as an example. If you wanted to create a data set of, say, maybe to detect relations in equities markets, and the context you put is Fed raising interest rates, well, now you can easily do that too, thanks to their machine learning algorithms. Personally, I think what Vectorspace is doing is really interesting. Yeah, we got a lot of big data companies like Palantir, Splunk, IBM, and a bunch of others. But as far as I know, Vectorspace is the only one out there that's integrating machine learning, along with having such a heavy focus in the bioscience industry, which we'll be covering a bunch of in this video. But before we get started, I just gotta let everyone know I'm not a financial advisor, and therefore nothing you ever hear or read from me should ever be taken as financial advice. And now, one other thing. So my Final Cut trial is about to end, which is pretty much the video editing software I'm using to bring you guys all this content over the past few months. So if you guys felt like my work has changed your way of thinking, or that you've benefited in any way from all the information I'm bringing, I'd be more than grateful for a small donation just so I can continue pumping these videos out for you guys. And as a broke college student, honestly, every little bit helps and it would be much appreciated. I'll add a couple addresses down below. So I'll have a Bitcoin wallet, an ERC20 wallet, a Stargazer wallet for the hypergraph, and an Algorand wallet. So yeah, definitely not mandatory or anything. I'll still probably try to find a way to get these videos out to you guys. So I guess just look at this more as a little tip. But enough of that, let's get right into it. So Vectorspace AI is actually a derivative of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which is based in San Francisco. Basically meaning they were conceptualized as its own business by Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And this definitely helps with the legitimacy in which other companies are looking at them. Since, well, if you're a subsidiary of one of the biggest colleges in the country, other companies and organizations and consortia are gonna sort of look at you in a more serious light, like, oh shit, these guys were built straight from Lawrence Berkeley Lab. They definitely know their shit. And that's one of the things that make Vectorspace AI so interesting. With so many projects in the space focused on things revolved around the industries of bringing blockchain and DLT to finance, IoT, big data, metaverse, NFTs, gaming, etc. Where's the projects bringing blockchain and DLT to the science and healthcare industry though? That's one area that's really going to see insane growth, because look at all that's happening: genetic sciences, particle studies, research on life cycles, computed lab testings, etc. And that's not to say all those things I previously mentioned don't matter. Obviously, they're huge, and rightfully so, because we're seeing the tokenization of assets all across the finance industry already. But it'd be nice to see some more development of blockchain and DLT projects within the science space. But basically, blockchain and distributed ledgers will completely change how the science industry is today. And what Vectorspace AI will do for it can range from things like just being able to test human structures reactions to certain compounds or chemicals, to being able to see the full life cycle of a microbe without needing to actually wait all that time. But pretty much how their primary service works is that a customer or institution brings the idea of a data set to them, and then Vectorspace AI creates that data set where the client can customize and choose the data sources, the amount of rows and columns in that data set, and the context control they want. And then finally, the number of times it's updated. So it's on average about 99 cents for each little input. So you add like 99 cents for each data source, 99 cents for each row or column, 99 cents for each context control, and 99 cents for each update. Now, this might not sound like a very profitable or sustainable business model, but think of it like this. When you've got science and finance firms that basically need near real-time updates, those data sets are going to need a lot of updating, given how much can change in such a short amount of time in these industries. So let's say these data sets update every minute. Well, that's 1,440 updates or dollars just from one client in one day. That's not even showing some of the other payments from other services that they'll require. So 50% of all these payments will go to the company's treasury, where they'll take a portion of that for token buybacks for themselves. And the other 50% will be used to acquire VXV to place in a wallet for that client to access data sets relative to the data hashes in that wallet. And a lot of these companies around the world, both in the science and finance industry, have kind of been noticing what Vectorspace AI is building and have worked to collaborate with them. But as a sort of very data science driven project, they've got some patents and awards of theirs to show for that, as every one of these patents I'm about to show you guys will at least have Vectorspace AI CEO Cajun Franks taking part in it, and at times even multiple members from the team. So they've got a patent for building out and generating relationship networks, basically by providing a set of data items that's related. Then the system pretty much generates data vectors on a graph that show hidden relations between each term and input. And so this system can be used to detect things like pictures, documents, videos, etc. And as you could imagine, this plays one of the key roles in Vectorspace AI's business model. This is pretty much what gives their datasets that component of detecting hidden correlations in all these big clumps of data. Then another patent here that's for basically analyzing and extracting content and context from human-generated lists. So basically, you guys are seeing how all these patents put together is kind of what makes up for their dataset solution. So basically, you put in objects of the same class, so say two equities or something, put in some context, and you get variable data length vectors of a relationship network. And then you can query search these relationships in that network and search for some other hidden relations based on the context you put in. Another medical publication here from the National Library of Medicine, which is the world's largest biomedical library and a leader in research of some things like genetic sciences and computational health data. So with Vectorspace CEO Cajun Franks and a few other doctorate level scientists and professors on here, this is basically a publication talking about an algorithm that's used to identify genes that are associated with aging and certain organisms, where they can specifically identify genes that are not only related, but also they can identify genes that kind of play a similar role through their LDA model, which is one of the systems they've built their natural language processing system into. Now, enough about their patents. Let's look into some of the other connections and possible partners Vectorspace is working with. So again, Vectorspace's progression is really different relative to your usual crypto projects. Rather than like forming new partnerships or speeding up their blockchain or anything, they're really focused on research and development, because after all, Vectorspace AI was literally built in a lab. So let's take a look at some of the things that's uncovered in some of their conference calls. Now, for most of these, there's not all too much concrete evidence backing it, so take it for what it is. I personally do think at times Cajun might stretch his words a little bit here and there. But at the same time, with all these connections I'm about to show you guys and all the PhDs and national bioscience organizations that they're working with, I'm not too worried. So they've had some talks with Morningstar, which is one of the world's largest financial research and services firms that's based in Chicago. And they offer things like data and analytics, financial rebalancing, portfolio management, and a whole bunch of other services. They've got about $250 billion in assets under management and about a revenue of $1.4 billion. So they've been talking for some time now, and both Morningstar and Vectorspace have already provided demos of their products, and where Vectorspace AI is going to look to integrate their data sets into these. And these guys have actually been in talks since way before Vectorspace AI was even conceptualized as an idea. So on May 16th through May 18th this year, so about 2 months from now, they'll be presenting at the Morningstar trade show, where Vectorspace is going to be presenting a demo with Morningstar, and this includes one of their real-time thematic short baskets, along with a real-time protein relationship network, and of course, their main dataset products, Vector Oracle and Vector Factor, which essentially both do the same thing in creating datasets based on real-time themes and events, though Vector Oracle, being the banking and institution one, will probably get more customization out of it, and Vector Factor will probably just be like more of your generic preset real-time datasets for us retail clients. And so they'll be giving a live demo of an MVP, minimum viable product, which pretty much means the initial stages of development, and at the part where it's just at the first offerable product. So basically, they believe that by detecting how hidden relationships between two subjects can eventually grow over time as certain events play out, Cajun basically says that if they're able to predict relationship between two proteins, much like how the COVID baskets are able to do to a certain extent, they can do the same thing with two assets. And they're going to be presenting all this with 10 other companies at the Morningstar FinTech Showcase, where there's going to be guys from JP Morgan, Fidelity, BlackRock, and a bunch of other financial institutions like those. So that's definitely going to be exciting to see and something to keep an eye out on, being exposed to all those other big names within the finance industry out there. Now, this isn't going to be their first time performing at a trading show. Last year in October, they also performed at the Chicago Trading Show on the Natural Language Processing panel, where they were on stage alongside JP Morgan's own head of machine learning. Now, beyond just Morningstar, they were also working with Standards & Poor for a bit, or more known as S&P. Yes, this is the same S&P as the S&P 500. But that partnership's kind of been on hold for now, as S&P doesn't quite yet have the natural language processing department on their team built out yet. So they've been focused on some of the other areas and collaborations, such as their collaborations with bioscience organizations and, of course, as we just mentioned, Morningstar. And something else I should also mention real quick is that since they are kind of a subsidiary of Lawrence Berkeley, their streams of cash flow don't just come in by their customers and clients, but also just from the funding from all these organizations like NASA, SpaceX, etc. Since I'm sure anyone can really just go and donate to a science department for research and development purposes. But yeah, I just want to put that out there. So their likes of failing due to lack of capital to move on is very unlikely, given some of their team and advisory board being connected to some very large corporations and organizations out there. Like Mina Bissell, for example, who's been working with Vectorspace AI for quite some time now. And she's won a whole bunch of science-related awards, along with some patents, and even had her own TED Talk. And aside from Vectorspace, she's even working with some other guys like NASA, Virgin Galactic, and a contract with the US Navy and Space Warfare, along with, of course, being the head senior scientist at Lawrence Berkeley. And so with Microsoft, Vectorspace has been working with them alongside their own subsidiary, Microsoft Azure, who just so happens to also be working with SpaceX. Yup, that's SpaceX, the one Elon Musk is building out. And Kasian has said that they've been talking together along with HP. And I mean, there's not any real confirmation of this besides what Kasian has said, but I guess look at this tweet from Elon. Now, honestly, there's no confirmation whatsoever about whether Elon was directing this towards Vectorspace AI, but we all know the kind of guy Elon is. And it pretty much says so much of AI is about compressing reality into a small vector space, like a video game in reverse. Now, honestly, I couldn't tell you what the fuck he's trying to say, but my guess is that he's referring to how artificial intelligence is like putting reality into a system, and basically just some code is at the core of that AI's whole reality. The second part, referencing a video game in reverse, I really don't know what to say. So for anyone who's got another theory to decode this, please feel free and let me know down in the comments below. So most of these partnerships with Space Biosciences, Vectorspace AI is working with have this one supercomputer related to it, and that's the HP Spaceborne 2. And it's basically a super robust and durable computer that can mirror human DNA in real time. And so what they're working on with SpaceX and Azure and NASA on primarily is finding a safe way for us humans to launch into space and solutions to repair the human body's DNA during spaceflight. And that's going to be a huge mission, because until we solve that, spaceflight isn't going to even be hitting semi-mainstream adoption, just due to all the risks we could face. So they'll be working on launches to space with the HP Spaceborne with the guys at NASA, but also at SpaceX, Azure, and Spaceborne, HP, along with some of the other universities they're working with. Because they're one of the few companies in the world right now that actually have such a strong focus on molecular biology. And of course, when you're trying to launch things up into space, you're going to need a bioscience group working on that. Like, for example, right now, SpaceX doesn't even have a bioscience focus working group. So when they got any questions, they got to ring up NASA Space Biosciences. And if NASA Space Biosciences can't answer that, who do they ask? Lawrence Berkeley Labs. And they've got some pretty good progress so far with the research and development they've done on predominantly the NASA end. We can see that one of the Vectorspace advisors was actually even a co-author in this paper on PubMed about DNA damage and space radiation. And PubMed is another one of those huge medical databases. They're basically a global medical database with over 20 million official publications on there. So Sylvian Costas, not only is he currently on the Vectorspace AI advisory, but he also used to work at Lawrence Berkeley Lab for a good 13 years, along with co-founding Exogen Biotech Labs before he settled down at NASA Gene Labs and Biosciences for the past 5.5 years now, winning multiple scientific R&D awards, along with over 70 publications. So having Sylvie into the team will definitely be huge, with synergy given that most of the team is made from Lawrence Berkeley, and of course when it comes to further collaborating with NASA, which is the plan. Now, we've broke down Mina's background earlier too, one of the earlier advisors that joined Vectorspace, who's also a legend at Lawrence Berkeley. So let's just go over some of their other advisors and what really makes this team so unique. There's Paul Slowey, who owns Oasis Diagnostics, which is a private medical firm that's focused on diagnostics with oral fluids, and he's been running that for the past 20 years now, in addition to being a member of the Oregon Biosciences organization for the past 14 years. So he's definitely got some connections behind the scenes with a lot of bioscience and medical giants out there. So just warning you guys about their next advisor, there's no fucking shot I'm going to be able to pronounce their name right, but I'll leave it on the screen here, which we'll be referring to as AR as an abbreviation for the rest of the video. So AR has had experience working in a couple academias focused on molecular studies, such as University of Florida and Cornell. But he's also been working at CERN for the past 13 years now. So it's very likely that AR's been sort of indirectly working with Vectorspace already, given the partnership for particle relation datasets that's formed between them and CERN. And then there's Raf Podolsky, who works as their sort of mix in between a chief data scientist along with another scientific advisor. And he's got a pretty long list of experience working in this biotech industry, ranging from AstraZeneca, Oracle, Joint Genome Institute, which works with the US Department of Energy, and Vectorspace is actually currently in talks with for collaborations. And then Raf's currently also working at Biorad Labs, where in the latter two I mentioned, he's had a heavy focus developing natural language processing, which, as we know, is Vectorspace's bread and butter. And talking about knowledge and research, Vectorspace is working with two of the biggest universities in UK, that being UCL, University College London, and Imperial College London, which is very R&D focused on space and biosciences. And in fact, Vectorspace is even working to have SpaceX, Azure, NASA, University College London, and Imperial College all working together. Now that is one crazy connection circle. But with Imperial College, they've presented together alongside Sarah Rouse Labs at the Biophysical Society annual meeting, where they showcase their relationship networks datasets and all the features of it, like their real-time correlation tracking, on-chain data provenance, and the easy visualization of these relationship networks. And with UCL, they're more focused on further research and development and bringing real-time and online unsupervised machine learning to AI. And so seeing Vectorspace AI working on R&D with these academias, including top scientific research labs around the world, is huge and really goes to show just how well and uniquely thought out their concept is. So now one question I get a lot, and I'm sure Occasion gets even more, is why is this even a crypto project? This sounds like a company that should be listed on the NASDAQ, not here in the crypto markets. Well, actually, that's something they're going to be looking to do in the near future, hopefully listing on the NASDAQ. And well, if you guys haven't noticed, just about every project I break down for you guys is in a similar situation, because it's projects like these that are actually going to see enterprise demand for their utility rather than, say, like Bitcoin adoption, where all institutions can really do is sell funds of it and trade it OTC or something. No, these projects like Quant, Constellation, and Vectorspace AI go so far beyond that, because now you're not just getting that initial side of adoption through being offered to retail and institutions as another investment vehicle, but now you're even getting demand and adoption from these labs and enterprises because they want to use what's been built. And to do that, you need the token. But on top of that, think of all the data these guys are using with the different fields they're working in, from genetics, particles, space biosciences, and finance. All these things have very sensitive pieces of data where if you get bad or incorrect data, that could result in billions of dollars being lost by institutions, or even worse, people dying because of improper data inputs in the bioscience industry. Since, well, in our legacy server bases, these pieces of data can all be tampered with, where it's pretty easy to change a system clock and kind of mess with the information there. Well, just by tampering with a system clock, it messes up pretty much the whole order and timeline of everything in that server, right? So what exactly is the problem here? It's a problem with immutability. And what's the solution for that? On-chain data with hashes of their dataset, since your traditional SHA-256 won't be changed. In other words, on-chain data all recorded on a blockchain is the solution to have a fully verified and immutable data logs. And this ties in perfectly with their VXV token, since these tokens can kind of represent these hashes of data as the datasets are accessible relative to a wallet address. And of course, some of the other more known use cases of the VXV token, like data provenance to track the point of origin in each dataset, since you can easily trace everything back on a block explorer now. And while that also relates perfectly with data security, since, well, as we all know, it's not exactly the easiest thing to hack into a blockchain and change the data in there. So the VXV tokens aren't just used for accessing datasets and data provenance, but that also ties in perfectly with their data security. And all this together is really where the value comes from of their datasets, which is reflected in their token. Because without the token, well, one, it'd be far more of an inefficient process to distribute these data sets, but also you got to basically have inputs of data you're not sure you can trust, since they aren't immutable. And pretty much anyone holding VXV has access to these data sets. So they are indeed essential for their business model, since anyone who wants to access these data sets will be required to hold some VXV in their wallets. But now, a lot of you guys are probably thinking that would turn away a lot of institutions and even retail having to hold VXV to even utilize their products. Well, currently that might be true, but at the same time, we're seeing rapid adoption, and you could say the same about a bunch of these other networks. If people want to use a service bad enough, they'll do it, just like how their partners in the science department are. And this kind of dilemma also ties in perfectly with their partnership with Trustology, which is a custody provider for digital assets, where the two of them are pretty much working together to make the purchasing of VXV tokens as simple as possible for their clients, so that they can easily go through the process in fiat and have access to the datasets with all the VXV related work done on the back end. And then moving on to their token buybacks, it's actually pretty straightforward. Just like all these companies you see in traditional finance doing buybacks, they're doing the same thing here with VXV, because these guys have had previous experience running a publicly traded company. So they get the whole concept of sort of equity buybacks. Only now it's buybacks of their token, which directly represent the value and demand of their data sets. So of course they're going to want to buy some of these tokens back for themselves. Now, when it comes to crypto partnerships, Vectorspace really doesn't have all that many, given they're so different from everything else. Well, there's actually one crypto project up here, and it's one we've talked about fairly often, and that's LCX, Liechtenstein Crypto Asset Exchange, and they're basically the most regulated exchange out there with over 8 licenses and being registered by FINMA. And of course, they're partnered with some of our favorite crypto projects out there, so they definitely know what's up. But this partnership is basically bringing Vectorspace AI's thematic baskets to LCX, and it'll be the first time us retail gets to see and have access to basically these kinds of alpha generating products onto a crypto exchange. So basically think like ETFs in legacy markets for those who have some previous experience there. Pretty much an ETF is an exchange traded fund. So it holds a bunch of different assets in there. For example, the SPY ETF is the S&P 500 ETF. So it holds the top 500 companies in the US economy. So like all your FANG stocks, Tesla, Microsoft, etc. And much like Vectorspace's datasets, these ETFs can be based off themes too, like ARC-G, which is heavily focused on innovations in genomic studies. I actually think there's a good chance we could see Vectorspace actually being a part of that basket once they're publicly traded. And so yeah, datasets are kind of like the evolution of ETFs, which is actually one of the things that make me so bullish on Vectorspace, because not only are they augmenting data into context-controlled datasets, which is already fucking massive, but what they're doing is offering ETFs on steroids that can track the performance of any theme or event in real time. So now you have auto-generated baskets of cryptos and other assets based on certain events that are happening. So say there's like an earthquake that hits. Well, now with Vectorspace's relationship detecting datasets, you can get potentially a short basket of some of the assets that be hit hardest by this certain global event. But this can also boil down more broadly into just basic thematic ETFs, like say a basket for metaverse tokens or DeFi or interoperability and any other subsectors and kind of hot terms that are in trend out there. And I honestly think that this could really help with retail adoption in crypto investments, because speaking from experience, when I first started my investing journey around 18, I would pretty much only touch ETFs since, well, if you're holding a basket of something, one of those things are bound to go up, right? So it's like a lower risk investment since your losses can kind of be offset by some of the other assets in that basket. And well, now the more passive investors don't really gotta do too much research, since all they really gotta know is, okay, this basket's for NFTs. So if the NFT markets are hot right now, then this basket will probably do well too. Things like that will really help drive up adoption from the mainstream retail investor markets, because now they don't really gotta deep dive into every project that they want to learn about, but they can find one sector of this digital asset space that kind of intrigues them, and just like that, build a thematic basket for that theme. So I'd imagine they're going to be forming this type of collaboration with not just a bunch of crypto exchanges, but possibly even stock exchanges in the future. And the best part of all this is that it'll require these underlying exchanges to all hold VXV, which of course will drive the demand up. And with token buybacks, bioscience academias, and even some retail traders paired up with a good majority of tokens already being in circulation, and you've got a pretty solid tokenomic model with demand coming from pretty much all angles. And now to wrap it up, just some of my personal thoughts. So personally, I think the potential for Vectorspace AI is just absolutely beyond massive. Just with all the industries that their datasets can be utilized in. Just think of all the relations that are unseen to the human eye or just never considered, even if they're two worlds completely apart. You could hypothetically detect relations in, say, the price of chocolates to the demand for Teslas, or the cost for manufacturing an iPhone against the price of Bitcoin. Or maybe you want to add a little context in there to detect relations between human genes and bored apes under the context of an earthquake in Japan. The list really just goes as far as your mind can stretch, because I literally just made those up. So with everything they're working to do, from the research and development end with guys like SpaceX, Azure, HP, and the universities they're working with, to the finance and crypto side with Morningstar, LCX, and even talks with S&P, and of course their growing advisory board with guys working from the Department of Energy, CERN, NASA, and Blue Origin. They've really got the connections and fundamental utility side of things covered pretty well. And the fact that they're a derivative of Lawrence Berkeley Labs has definitely shown a pretty strong catalyst, landing them all these collaborations, in addition to getting funding without having to go through VCs or anything like that, since they're not really too different from an academia lab. It's not every day you find a project with connections to things like PubMed, National Library of Medicine, Morningstar, and NASA. So seeing this really makes me think, like, holy shit, blockchain and DLT is actually beginning to flow into other industries aside from trade finance, and one of the first things we see out of it is something like this. I mean, let's be real here. The concept of datasets like these really do sound like a futuristic idea that you'd see in like a database from a sci-fi movie or something. So I'm really excited to see where their next steps are, both when it comes to further understanding relationship networks and DNA during spaceflight, along with how their smart baskets will change the way we see trading and investing once we can have AI bring in real-time correlation events to us. And this is the only crypto project I know that's so focused on the science and R&D side of things. And I really think that's what's gonna like help set them off and give them that first mover advantage. But remember that because of the versatility that these datasets bring into any industry, because all you need is some qualitative and some quantitative data and a little bit of context, and you start seeing things in real time you never would have been able to detect previously. So it's definitely going to be exciting to see the continued adoption and acceptance from the disruption that Vectorspace is going to be bringing. I think it'll probably be a bit longer of a process relative to some of the other projects to reach mass adoption, since some crypto assets are attacking other sectors, predominantly trade finance, which definitely moves a lot faster than the health and science industry, given all that could go wrong with just a couple mistakes. And the fact that VXV tokens are going to be required to access these data sets either by the institutions or exchanges or by the retail traders themselves, since not only is it used for the distribution of these data sets, but also for provenance and security. And now just add in token buybacks and a possible lending mechanism to institutions or just other traders. Well, I think we're in a pretty good spot. And one thing I didn't really cover was the investment club, which pretty much is just them opening up their own fund that any VXV holder can have access to. And it'll probably be like indexes of their data sets, but that's still a pretty deep work in progress between development and having to meet regulations for something of that nature. But for now, that's pretty much what we got. So that's about it for our deep dive of Vectorspace AI today. I honestly learned a lot about this project myself, diving so much deeper, and hopefully you guys can say the same after watching this video, and hopefully it motivates you guys to do some more of your own digging. So if you guys did like what you saw today, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe and turn that ringer on so you don't miss a thing. And don't forget to check out some of my other content platforms. You guys can always reach out and connect to me through my Telegram, Twitter, and Instagram, or catch more fundamental analysis on my Spotify and Medium. All this is at Tokenicer, and I'll be sure to leave a link down below for each of these connects. And again, I'll have a few wallet addresses down below for anyone wishing to donate to the cause so I can continue pumping these videos out for you guys. And as always, remember to stay safe and keep grinding. I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.